We are Group 7, and this is our video presentation.
So the first thing we're looking at is specifically disability versus disease. So at this day and age, especially, it's very important to be able to concretely define the difference between disability and disease. This has always been a difficult concept that has eluded many due to the unfortunate fact that all cultures, classes, and races often define disability and disease differently. What some people might conclude as a sickness, other folks might see as just a difference, an inconvenience, or simply a part of them. It is also important to acknowledge the ways the disease change over time, or more so perceptions of disease. As overall health, well-being, and treatments increase, conditions that were unavoidable before have become pathologicalized. For example, osteoporosis was not recognized as a disease by the WHO until 1994 because it was seen as inevitable prior to modern medicine. And then another example of this is homosexuality, because that until 1974 was recognized as a disease of the mind. And this shows how intertwined societal judgments and expectations are with the pathologization and how we can abuse this term. Furthermore, it is important to be able to accurately define disease because of how much we can do now with the modern medicine and research to combat these harmful conditions. And as the article states, it quote unquote matters a great deal what we decide to tackle. Because of the difficulties presented when trying to define disability and disease, it seemed appropriate to try and break down the major differences within each of the concepts, as shown here. Disability is seen as an overall lack of ability to exist within an able-bodied society without accommodations being made for them to function comfortably. Perspectives on disability can be distorted, however, based upon the model under which it is viewed. The medical model analyzes disability from the viewpoint of the individual person and their biological constraints, rather than applying these constraints to societal norms that further allow the disability to even be considered a disability. The social model hopes to solve this issue by differentiating between the impairment itself and the experience caused by it. An example provided within the article discusses the presence of impaired hearing as one aspect of disability, while television without subtitling is another. Another important thing to mention about disability is that being born with or simply having a disability does not necessarily mean lesser quality of life or happiness. And then looking over at disease, it's difficult to determine and define based on the fact that it exists in relation to people, while multiple factors come into play, such as geography, culture, and historic evolution of what is and is not considered a disease. An example of this mentioned in the article is homosexuality, where it was described as an endocrine disturbance that required hormone treatment and is now no longer considered a medical condition and rather a state of being and an identity. Anthropology and sociology bring into perspective the societies that differ on even considering themselves to have disease or illness based on classes, genders, and ethnic groups. Another thing to mention about disease is the fact that there was a line drawn between behavior that makes people uncomfortable and what is a diagnosable disease. And this is most likely related to mental illness, with ADHD being the focus within the article, where it discusses badly behaved children within a school or classroom setting. And overall, both disability and disease have the complexity to be case sensitive in terms of how people define and understand them.
So as the article, What is a Disease states, human diseases only exist in relation to people, and people live in varied cultural contexts. What the author is meaning by this is that a person's view on what disease or disability means can vary depending on their background. Some cultures might view disability in a positive light, while others thoroughly believe it is a disadvantage. Whether people believe if they are ill or not can vary because of someone's cultural background, ethnicity, class, gender, and many other factors. People come from all walks of life, and because of their experiences, they can have very different opinions on the definitions of certain words, in this case, disease and disability, and even if disability should be considered a disease itself. There are also different opinions and viewpoints within the medical field, among doctors or even insurance companies. Some people might regard someone that is predisposed to a certain condition as unhealthy, even if they don't actually have it. Oftentimes with insurance, you have to reveal the disabilities that run in your family and what you are susceptible to, leading to higher rates and prices. Someone or So should someone be considered ill or diseased since they have a predisposition, or is it all up to interpretation based on someone's background? Context is definitely important, and someone's history, upbringing, and culture help to make them who they are. But it also leads to different viewpoints because everyone is just simply so different from each other. It leads to interesting conversations, but in this case, it can cause opposing and complicated viewpoints on what a disability is and should actually be classified as, especially in terms of whether they impact someone's life in a positive or negative way.
And next, how disabilities can have a positive impact. There are many different perspectives and experiences attached to disabilities. Many of these differing perspectives may be dependent upon the specific type of disability, as well as whether or not it is genetic and stable versus a progressive disability. Some individuals may view their disability as a positive trait. For example, some individuals within the deaf community have commented stating that rather than a disability, it is a part of their individual identity. They have also been able to view their disability as allowing them to become a part of the community. Deaf culture is a term used by some individuals within the deaf community, which truly highlights how important of an aspect to their identity and community deafness is to them. Many have also stated that if you take these disabling elements away from me, I wouldn't be X. I would no longer be that person. This specific positive perspective can also be highlighted by the example of many deaf individuals viewing themselves not as disabled, but as a cultural or linguistic minority. And then how disabilities can have a negative impact. On the other hand, other individuals may view their personal disabilities as negative features. This may have a lot to do with their specific type of disability. Some disabilities may be viewed as making life harder, such as the need to use a wheelchair. Another example of this would include the warning pregnant mothers oftentimes receive after being told that their child has Down syndrome. This warning was given, explaining various challenges their child may face. The article, What is a Disease?, also highlights the idea that different perspectives are given to different disabilities, again, oftentimes dependent upon the certain type and severity of disability. For example, while some may view deafness as a disease, others view it as an unfortunate condition, and some even view it as just a way of being.
So to kind of put a face to what we're talking about when we're talking about Kristen, Kristen's experience with her disability shines a light on the common perspective many able-bodied people hold, which is one that negatively highlights the experience of the disability as a form of suffering. People view it as some type of suboptimal living conditions, but how can we claim that if we can't possibly understand their experience of their life? Not to say that there aren't any hardships that people with disabilities deal with, just that they perceive them differently than we do. Kristen was born blind. She now has 2 healthy kids and is married to James. James is much older than her and has 2 daughters that are slightly older than Kristen. But James wasn't born, or was born with sight, but was blinded in his early 30s. James and Kristen fell in love after meeting at a mutual sales job, and after that they got married. When Kristen and James had their 2 children, though, it was a much different experience for Kristen. Her pregnancy was than those who are can see and are pregnant. During her first pregnancy, she never when she was still pregnant, she never received those comments and compliments such as congratulations or what's the baby's name. It kind of made her feel socially isolated and with feeling that little people cared about how she was doing with her pregnancy. She also felt that it was due to her blindness that people didn't approach her about her future child. When having her first child in the hospital, doctors referred to Kristen's blindness as a life issue. Just one of the many small comments about her raising a child with her blindness. The doctors even went as far to recommend an abortion because of the possibility that the child might be born with blindness and other health-related issues. Ironically enough, this was in a Catholic hospital. In many states, it is legal to take away the custody from parents who can be classified as disabled, even though they are perfectly capable of taking care of the children themselves. And so, surrounded by all these doctors who had little to no faith in her ability to take care of her child, she decided that when she got pregnant with her second son, she was going to do a home birth. Even then, nurses were ignorant and asked ignorant questions regarding her ability to do simple responsibilities with no eyesight, even though it was her second child and she had already began to raise a child as a blind woman years before. raising her children, she was like she received weekly emails like while they were still babies, like checking in on the development of her baby. And on the 5th week, she received an email saying that her hard work will be paying off, and like just because she's been taking care of her son properly, because she would finally be able to see her child's first smile. But being blind, she kind of felt for the first time in her life a longing to be normal, because they didn't know she was blind. As since they sent that email, she felt a longing to be normal, and she kind of went into a depression because she felt like she wouldn't be able to connect with her child, seeing as she wouldn't know when he smiled, so she could smile back. But being the strong woman she is, she knew that she would be able to, she got past that, and she knew that she'd be able to be the perfect mother for her baby. For her first child, Langdon, she actually caught on audio recording her son's first laugh. Fittingly enough, it was on Valentine's Day. She knew he was smiling because he laughed as he sang along to a song with her, to one of her favorite songs, in baby noises, of course. This gave her the idea to capture many of these shared moments in audio recordings, then eventually videos when they got access to iPhones. She was able to capture many moments, including them crying, playing in the bathtub, or even them trying to read her a bedtime story. She loves to go back and listen to her child's first smile, and does so quite often. And that short glimpse of her life, Kristen, show that perspective is so important to consider when we talk about people with perceived disabilities. Despite the hardships she went through during her life, she only ever wished she was socially normal once in her life. She was still happy with her 2 children and her husband, James. This brings into question, how should we define disability when there are people out there who consider themselves to be happy, but in others' eyes disabled? How do we incorporate these individuals' perspectives into change required to eliminate the social stigma of having disability? It all starts with compassion and really understanding that everyone has unique knowledge from their experiences in life to share.